Your business down in Devon is called Wildwise, isn't it? And it sounds like over the years you've honed a very, really immersive. It sounds really incredibly immersive. The experience there. Is that
Yeah,
what you're trying to
it's
do?
good old, yeah, it's good old, that best way of learning is that immersive learning, experiential learning, and physical contact. I mean, we all learn in different ways, don't we? But I think just out in nature where we're designed to be, let's not forget the whole kind of design concept of a human being is as a sort of, a creature that lives 24/7 out in the wild world. We've forgotten that really. So we have sensibilities for it, we have attributes, and we have a relish for it. And Wildwise really is just designed to issue these different invitations for people to step over the threshold and reconnect, rekindle that love affair with the natural world. And of course, the night time on night walks and whatever it is, Star Treks or viewing parties is a part of a much broader, base of activity that we do down here in Devon, training people as well as offering these immersive things for families or kids or even teenagers.
You mentioned in the book about calling an owl, about how you show kids how to make that, or adults how to make that owl noise and call them. And I can remember being a kid and somebody saying to me that if you do that, an owl will come, and say that's a load of rubbish. But it obviously isn't. So is that something you regularly do with them? And
I mean, it's not something we endlessly do. Occasionally, at the right time of year, and briefly, one has to sort of respect that the mating game, the breeding season for birds is it's an incredibly intense time in terms of their kind of requirements, in terms of the energy that it costs to do
right.
all of that in that time of year. So, but an occasional interaction, brief as I say, reveals that indeed owls are very territorial. And so in the spring, particularly in the spring, when they're being very protective about their territories and their patch, they can respond, if they're within earshot, to a call that is not really an approximation of an owl call, but quite a precise, owl call. So, for example, that traces out the sort of sequence quite precisely. That's your to not your to wit, but your to woo of the male. And the males are that much more protective and stimulated by the sound of another male potentially coming in. So what they'll do is they'll fly in to check you out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so briefly, we'll perhaps see the silhouette fly into a big tree, and that's a marvelous thing.
Yeah.
And I might put on a torch just briefly so that everyone can see the owl, and then we'll leave it in peace. But it never fails to thrill, and all these incredible sort of insight and access to these exotic creatures from around the world, and these intrepid presenters that go into jungles and into these extreme environments to bring you these very rare creatures. You think that we're all saturated with that, but not at all. Actually, real contact with wildlife in our own sort of back garden remains a big wow, and quite a big experience, in a lifetime to see that. So I'm very, very pleased about that. People have a relish and an appetite for seeing wild animals, even relatively, local ones.
And also not just the big ones. You talk about the mini beast safaris, which sound like my idea of hell, but talk us through a mini beast safari.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's not like that film, that scene in the insect cave in that film King Kong. It's well, it's something as a practitioner, of night walks, you can rely on. The weather may not be conducive for owls, or even bats, or any of the other sort of celebrities of the night time, but you can always guarantee that underneath the rocks, in the old rotten wood, in the sort of shallow little stream edges, that you can find all sorts of creatures and mysteries, really, things that you might recognize, things that hunt at night, because of course, at night, there's freedom from the relentless predators, the birds. For the insects, they're pretty busy at night. So the usual kind of things, slugs and the snails and the harvestmen and the various sort of little beetles and spiders. They're all out there, but there are so many things that you've just never seen before, and so much variety as well. And it's fascinating. And all of them have got stories to tell, of course. All of them have got these bizarre sort of life cycles where you spin a bit of narrative about whatever it is, say something like a sexton beetle, for example, that that flies around the woods and is picking up the scent of something that is freshly dead, which is why it's called a sexton beetle. And then it'll kind of come down, and if it's the right time of year, what it wants to do is it wants to sort of excavate some soil around a small mammal, like maybe a shrew or something like that. And it'll spend all this time digging so that the shrew sort of sinks down under the ground, literally into the ground. And then it'll create these little tunnels when it lays its eggs at the entrance of these tunnels. And when the eggs hatch, it's timed for the rotting kind of carcass of the shrew to sort of reach the equivalent nostrils of these little larvae, and they head down the tunnel to feast upon the decaying flesh. I mean, that's just one example of a sort of bizarre, attribute of these many of these different sort of invertebrates. But it does bring the storytelling aspect does bring people into some sort of acquaintance and affinity with these creatures, and it's part of the fascination of the night. Take a little torch, go and look what's out there, and the challenge is always, particularly when there's kids involved, well, can you find something you've never seen before? And then, with the invertebrate world, again, there's always a possibility of a new discovery, because there's so much diversity there that who knows, there are still things being discovered all the time. So yes, it's an underrated and underestimated feature of the night, I think, and lots of oohs and ahs, and
Yeah. Well, you mentioned there the viewing party, and this takes us back to the stars, to the heavens. I was quite intrigued by the origins of the viewing party. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
It's a lovely little sequence, very simple really, but is to take a little group out for what we call a little sit spot to find a place with a view, and perhaps timed with some magical event like a moonrise or a moonset. And it's literally heading out in the dusk, or that moment of action, like just before a moonrise or a moonset. Could even be a sunset, of course, as well, or simply to view the stars, on a moonless night. And it's really taken from a Japanese tradition, which in the Japanese spring, there's a lovely old tradition of sitting under a cherry tree to appreciate the blossom when it comes out. It's there as it is at the moment here in Devon in April. It's there for so little time, and in that very Zen tradition, the Japanese would sit under, a cherry tree, and they would sip their plum wine, or even cherry wine, and just sit in appreciation, in a sort of moment of contemplation. So it's a viewing party takes that really and sort of runs with it a little bit by walking out to a place of enchantment, and sits everyone out with just a little bit separate, so they're on their own to contemplate the night. And then I usually pop around very quietly, offering people a little bit of plum wine or maybe a hot drink or something like that. And then we gather again, to sort of appreciate what we've just seen and walk back. So it's a very simple thing, isn't it, to do, just to go out together and sit. But it's a really lovely little sequence. And there might be a bit of poetry, that sort of starts and finishes it or something like that. But and you can vary it. So yeah, that's the viewing party.
You've actually just reminded me of a recent experience of mine. I went for a dusk walk. I didn't know it was a dusk walk at the time. I thought it was just a late afternoon walk, but now I know it's a dusk walk along the River Thames down to Canary Wharf. And there's a bit where you sort of come out of Wapping and you're suddenly confronted with the whole of the city. And it was just turning dark, and everything was all lit up. And it does look quite incredible. I know it's not the kind of beauty that you would experience in Devon. It's a different kind of beauty. But above the city was a moonrise, and there above the city, this moon was stealing the show, And it just looks absolutely incredible. There's something special about that moment, I think, isn't there?
Well, I think we get a bit of a broader picture, don't we? We get a bit of an insight, really, with the night sky, and moon in particular. These kind of phenomenal cosmic, things that are happening that we forget about in our day, distractions. So it always engenders a little bit of awe and wonder, and that is the kind of, I suppose that's the holy grail of a nature connection facilitator, is to enable that to happen. So simple things, as you say, like a moonrise, cause you to stop and think and reflect and just appreciate our place in space as well, our perspective. Oh yeah, this is a blessing, isn't it? This is a planet spinning at 60,000 miles an hour around the sun, and these cosmic events are all playing out because we're just this sort of tiny little miracle with this experiment called life on it. And it just might help us to remember a little bit of gratitude and wonder about this extraordinary opportunity of existence.
Absolutely, absolutely. And another one of those simple things is water. So just quickly on water, you talk about night paddles, and I think a lot of people watching this will have had the experience of going for a swim at night, and it really reminded me. A book really reminded me to appreciate that, because the sound, the texture, everything just changes, doesn't it?
Oh, and smell. Don't forget the fragrance too of the night. It's a very different experience. I mean, through the senses of the nighttime. I was doing a little night paddle the other night, and the fragrance on the river at night is very different. It's something that's just has to be experienced, really. Needless to say, the silence. We are a little bit we're a little bit kind of polluted in a way by all the noise we've created, and but at night it all quietens down, of course. So we have that sense of peace and quiet, and we get that. And a night paddle is one of the most sublime ways to experience the night. It's not an easy thing for everyone just to get up and go and do. Like you could take yourself for a walk, but you might find someone with some experience to take you out on a canoe at night. Heartily recommend it. We run them quite regularly down here in Devon. We've got the beautiful River Dart to do that. We can do that safely, and it's a wild experience. Sublime. And I think that underestimated word, enchanting, it really does create an affinity with the nighttime world, unlike anything else.
Last year, I mean, I realised that from a business perspective, it won't have been kind to you. But is there a bit of you that actually enjoyed that pause and that extra silence? That this has brought. I mean,
Yes, I did.
Bit,
Yes, I did. I mean, it's been a wonderful, a success story, really, Wildwise, as it's developed over the years. But the break, the interlude, was magical. I think around here, certainly where I live in South Devon, traffic levels, for example, returned even by daytime to what they were in the 1950s, which is a bit more before I was born. But goodness me, it was an insight into just what we've done, really, in that regard. And yes, and I had time too. And of course, I also started discovering in my own locality, on my bike and on my strolls around with the kids, new things in my own area, places I wouldn't normally have chosen to go because perhaps, walking along the road in the lanes with kids, or biking along, might have been a bit risky, whereas, in lockdown it wasn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely, got the blessing of that. I wasn't in a sort of, confinement, or in prison like some people were, of course. I was, where I chosen to live, I have access to the sort of forest and the river valley. So, for many of us around here, we were surprisingly blessed by the opportunity that not having to work so much gave us. And of course, Greg, I got the time to finally write this book, which has been about 14 years in the, waiting.
Yeah.
And I had time.
Yeah, 14 years of experience. We've gone into this brilliant book, Wild Nights Out. And I think that there'll be legions of people who in a sense have been imprisoned, who will be pouring into the countryside, hopefully, in a way that the countryside wants them to explore. And coming down to see you and really just appreciating and reconnecting with nature. I think it's going to be a really interesting year from that point of view.
Yes, it will. There'll be another summer like we had last year, I think, as people are kind of, not yet traveling abroad so much. But what it's done is, we've sort of come out of exile in a way.
Yeah.
Here we are. We live in Britain, and most of us are in exile from it, like tourists, in a foreign country. We don't actually have much affinity with it anymore. There are people who will tell you in great detail about some exotic place where they went on holiday, where they gave themselves the time to enjoy it and walk in it and pay attention to it, but they won't be able to name 5 birds in their back garden. So that's been changing. So there's been a bit of a reset in that regard, and for many people, they've realised what a beautiful country Britain is, as denuded as it is in terms of wildlife compared to other countries around the world. It's still got this wonder to it and mystery and enchantment to it, and people have been discovering that. So that's been the blessing, and I hope they continue.
That's right. And in discovering it, then learn to protect it and do the right thing. Absolutely.
Well, you do. You only protect what you love. And so you have to fall in love with it first. And that's exactly what we're up to down in Devon, is helping rekindle that love affair.
Well, let's end on that very positive message. And thank you for the book and for the chat. And I wish you a very happy and long and quite dark summer. Enjoy the nights of summer.
Well, the problem with summer is you get less time of the night. That's why I enjoy the winter so much.
Okay. Oh, well, that'll roll around soon, I'm sure. Well, thank you for your time and all the very best.
Thanks, Craig.